What's going on, guys? I'm Zach from the Lumios Post, where we talk about all things Pokemon, and today we're going to be talking about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, specifically something I think that we could very well see in Scarlet and Violet DLC, and that is doing with a Pokemon that actually is not from Scarlet and Violet, but is in fact from X and Y. Yes, I know, another Kalos Paldea video. They'll never end. Ever. I don't think that we're going to Kalos in Scarlet and Violet DLC, but I do think that there are some heavy ties to it, and I made a video covering all the things that is making me think this, is making me feel like there's a chance that we could see some form of Kalos connection in DLC. Again, not the Kalos region, but some kind of connection there, and I stand by that. If you want to see that video, be sure to check it out. It'll be up there, but today we're talking about one specific point from that video, and that is Diancie and Carbink. So Diancie is in the coding for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It's not available yet because Home isn't out yet, but once Home is out, Diancie will be available in Scarlet and Violet. It's one of many Pokemon that will be transferable from Home. Now, another Pokemon that's transferable from Home is Carbink. And the interesting thing about this is if you look at all the Pokemon that are transferable from Home, they all are either starters or legendary Pokemon or mythicals, or they're regional variants or Hisuian evolutions. So, things like Ursaluna or Basiligian or Sneasler, those kinds of things. They're all that, except for Carbink. Carbink is just a regular old Mon that's in there. Now, obviously, Carbink is connected to Diancie. We know this. Diancie is said to be like a Carbink that over time was kind of just became a Diancie due to pressurization or something. It was some weird form of evolution. In a way, Diancie is like a paradox of Carbink, given what we know about paradox Pokemon. But all that aside, the point is that it's still weird that Carbink isn't Home, even if Diancie is, because there are plenty of Pokemon that are in Home, but Pokemon that are connected to them are not in Home. For example, Charizard is in Home. You're going to be able to transfer it in, or you may already have one from the raid event they did. But Venusaur and Blastoise are not. Likewise, we have Samurott, Decidueye, and Typhlosion. They're all in because, they were the Hisui starters. They were a trio together. But members from their original trio are not in. So things like Emboar, Serperior, Primarina, Incineroar, and Feraligatr and Meganium. They're all not in despite their counterparts being in. So all of this to say, Reggie's is another great example. Regidrago, Alecki, and Gigas are in, but Ice, Steel, and Rock are not. But all this is to say that it's weird that they made the effort to put Carbink as a transferable Mon when it's not in the Paldea Dex, and it really doesn't have to be in there. The whole reason I think it is in there is because of Diancie, but more specifically, I think it's because of a Diancie plot that may be coming in Scarlet and Violet DLC. Now, the reason I think this is because if you look back at Sword and Shield, if you look at the Pokemon that were transferable in through Home, you'll see some interesting things. So first off, you will see the Alolan starters were transferable in. You could transfer in, Decidueye, Incineroar, and Primarina. Well, in Isle of Armor, the DLC for Sword and Shield, there was a little side quest looking for Alolan Diglets that you could do, where it would result in you getting an Alolan starter. So it was in the coding already, and then ended up being a gift in DLC. Then, another Pokemon that was available from the very beginning via Home was the Swords of Justice. So Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and Keldeo. In the Crown Tundra, they were given their own plot, with you having a whole side quest where you hunt for Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and it culminates with you being able to get a Keldeo. So my theory here is that Diancie and Carbink are here because there's going to be a story tied to them in DLC. And that's why Carbink's here too, is because not only will you get Diancie, but because it's going to be a Diancie-focused story, they're of course going to talk about Carbink, because that is very, very heavily tied into the lore of Diancie. Diancie is a evolution, or perhaps these games will even say it's a paradox of Carbink, after all. Now, how do I think this plot will go? I could see it being plain and simply that Carbink and Diancie are given their own side quests, like the Swords of Justice, where it's not remotely connected to anything. You know, the Swords of Justice, it wasn't really a plot you had to do to, like, learn more about the Sword and Shield story. It was just there. Like, you could do it, but it wasn't a main quest by any means. It could be that for Diancie and Carbink. Or they could tie it in to the games. They could make it a big part, similar to how the Galarian birds were kind of a big part of the Crown Tundra story, or the Reggies were a big part of the Crown Tundra story, or a part of it, rather. There were, you know, multiple segments, but still. What I think they may do is they could, for one, talk about how Diancie is a Paradox Pokemon. You know, they could retcon this whole thing and say Diancie is a Paradox of Carbink, and so there's a whole plot around it because it was a Paradox this whole time. Or, and I think this is more likely, they will connect it to another Pokemon, and that is Glimmora. And now the reason I'm saying this is because, yes, they're all crystally. You know, Carbink and Diancie, there's clear crystals in their design. Glimmora is also very crystally, and even is supposed to be reminiscent of Terra Crystals. Its Pokedex entry talks about how its petals are reminiscent of Terra Crystals, which makes me think Glimmora is tied to the third legend, which we have yet to see in-game, but we've seen, you know, the little picture of it in the book, and we have been told that it is responsible for the Terrestrial phenomenon. So, it would make sense that Glimmora, a Pokemon that is reminiscent of Terra Crystals, would be tied into the Pokemon who's responsible for the creation of Terra Crystals, right? I mean, that just makes sense. That also would explain why Glimmora's all over Area 0, which is where the third legendary calls home. So, there's a number of ways they could do this, how they could tie Carbink and Diancie into Glimmora and this other Pokemon. They could do it all through Infinity Energy. You know, if Infinity Energy is responsible for the time machine, which a lot of people have theorized it is, myself included, because the crystals look so much similar to the crystal appearance of the ultimate weapon from X and Y, they could tie all that together and say, well, yeah, because the third legendary is tied to Infinity Energy, which means Glimmora is tied to Infinity Energy, Diancie is tied to Infinity Energy, because of its capabilities with Mega Evolution, and that would mean Carbink is tied to it as well, because after all, again, Diancie is very heavily related to Carbink. Or they could say that same phenomenon that happened to Carbink to allow it to become a Diancie is what happened with the third legendary. Maybe Glimmora is the third legendary. Maybe Glimmora is some kind of pressurization happened, similar to what happened with Carbink to turn Diancie, that turned a Glimmora into this third legendary. And like with Carbink, where Carbink is, you know, by no means a competitive Pokemon, it gets a huge power boost through this special evolution and becomes Diancie, and is even able to access more power with its own variety of moves and being able to Mega Evolve now. Likewise, we could see the same thing with Glimmora. Glimmora could change into this third legendary and now be able to access all kinds of powers, being able to affect space-time, or maybe even reality itself, imagination, all that thing. All of that could be the case with Glimmora's special evolution. So then they tie it all together by comparing the two, Glimmora and the third legendary, to Carbink and Diancie. Perhaps you have to go study Carbink and Diancie in a South Kalos area or something similar to better understand Glimmora's relationship with the third legendary in the plot of the Scarlet and Violet DLC. Either way, I definitely think we're getting something to do with Carbink and Diancie in DLC. I definitely think they're going to be involved. I think there's going to be their own story for them. Maybe it's like a side quest that's not important to the plot, like it was with the Swords of Justice, but who knows? They could end up being a huge part of the game and a huge part of understanding the third legendary Pokemon, its powers, the time machine, the professors and their AIs. as well as just frankly the Paradox Pokemon as a whole, and Area Zero as a whole. So yeah, be sure to let me know in the comments below what you think of this theory. Be sure to let me know if you think that Carbink and Diancie will be involved in DLC somehow, if they'll get their own story, and do you think it'll be more like the Swords of Justice where it's separate, or do you think they will heavily tie it into the story? Again, let me know all that in the comments below. Be sure to also like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss all of our future Pokemon videos. If we start finding out more about Carbink and Diancie, Glamora, and this third legendary, whatever, you know we'll be covering it here, and you don't want to miss that. Until next time, I will see all of you later.